Setrusumab checked many of the boxes biotech investors look for: rare disease, clear biology, late-stage data. But one phase 3 result wiped out years of work in a single morning. And the reason wasn't manufacturing, funding, or competition. It was a missed primary endpoint, the most unforgiving outcome in drug development. This week, shares of Ultragenyx Pharmaceutical and Mereo BioPharma fell sharply after announcing disappointing phase 3 results in osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle-bone disease. It's a rare genetic disorder that causes fragile bones, frequent fractures, and lifelong disability, exactly the kind of indication investors assume has regulatory flexibility. But this case reminds us of a hard truth. Rare disease does not mean lower standards. Let's start with what the companies claimed. The therapy was designed to strengthen bone and reduce fracture risk by targeting pathways involved in bone formation and remodeling. The narrative was compelling: meaningful functional improvement, fewer fractures, and a potential disease-modifying therapy for patients with limited options. And importantly, this wasn't early-stage hype. This was a phase 3 program, the final gate before approval. From a biology standpoint, osteogenesis imperfecta is relatively well understood. It's primarily driven by mutations affecting collagen structure or processing, which leads to weak bone matrix and increased fracture risk. The rationale for targeting bone remodeling pathways makes sense: improve bone quality, and you should reduce fractures. And there's precedent. Other therapies in bone disorders have successfully altered bone density and turnover markers. But here's the catch: improving biological markers doesn't always translate to meaningful clinical benefit. That translation gap is where many bone drugs struggle. Bone density changes don't automatically mean fewer fractures or better mobility. So under BECR, the biology isn't speculative, but it's also not bulletproof. Biology verdict: partial validation. Reasonable mechanism, but historically difficult to convert into functional outcomes. This is the core failure. The trial missed its primary endpoint. And it's worth pausing here, because endpoints are where biotech optimism goes to die. The primary endpoint defines success. It's what the FDA cares about, what the trial is powered for, and what investors are underwriting. In this case, the endpoint likely aimed to demonstrate a measurable improvement in fracture risk or physical function over a defined period. But the data didn't show a statistically significant or clinically meaningful benefit. And once that happens, secondary endpoints, subgroup analyses, or biomarker improvements carry much weight. This is why endpoint selection is not a technical detail, it's a strategic decision. If the endpoint is too ambitious, variability too high, or duration too short, even a biologically active drug can fail. Endpoint verdict: fail. And in BECR terms, this alone can sink the entire program. Interestingly, CMC was not the issue here. No major concerns around manufacturing complexity, scale-up, formulation, or supply chain were highlighted. This is a good reminder that CMC risk and clinical risk are independent. You can have clean manufacturing and still fail clinically, and that's exactly what happened here. CMC verdict: low risk, but irrelevant once efficacy collapses. Regulatory implications are severe. A missed primary endpoint in phase 3 leaves almost no viable approval path. The FDA rarely approves drugs based on post-hoc analyses, especially in chronic conditions where risk tolerance is limited. Accelerated approval is off the table. A new pivotal trial would mean years of delay and massive capital requirements. And that raises an existential question for smaller biotechs. Do they even have the resources to try again? Regulatory verdict: high risk, bordering on non-viable without a full reset. Let's summarize this through the BECR lens. Biology: partial. Endpoints: fail. CMC: low risk. Regulatory path: high risk. This is a classic example of how a single pillar, endpoints, can override everything else. This is why we analyze drugs, not press releases. If you want biotech analysis grounded in biology, endpoints, manufacturing, and regulatory reality, not hype, subscribe to Sustainable Pharma. Biology, endpoints, CMC, regulatory.